Ho ho ho! Coming to you from the merry city of board gaming, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, Santa Bryce. Tied in with the popular recurring Out of the Dust geek list on Board Game Geek, the Out of the Dust podcast is a bi-weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we play that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we're interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, episode 57. On the Out of the Dust segment, I'll bring Western Legends out of the dust, and a contributor will dust off Ace of Aces, handy Rotary series. On the reaction segment, I tell you about my time at BGG Con. On the What I've Been Playing segment, I review Bus. On the Obscure Bryce game segment, I review Emira. And we wrap up the episode by concluding my top 5 at 2009 countdown with number 1 on the list. I had a chance to bring Western Legends, the 2018 Western-themed sandbox game from publisher Colossal Games and designer Hervé Lemaitre, out of the dust recently. I last played it 1 year, 1 month, and 17 days ago at NewtCon, where I hosted an epic 6-player session of the game. I haven't played it since then, though, because my wife didn't much care for it, and I was hesitant to get it to the table again, knowing there was new expansion content coming. After getting the new Ante-Up expansion in the mail the day before I left for BGG Con, I decided to take the game with me to the convention. I splurged on some component upgrades in the form of wooden card holders and the giant neoprene playmat board. With the expansion Kickstarter, was as excited to test them out as I was the new modules in the expansion itself. I had some free time Saturday afternoon at the convention, decided that would be an ideal time to try to get in a game. By the time I was done setting up, I had 4 more players excited to test out the expansion with me. There were a lot more modules in the expansion than I was expecting, but I incorporated about half of them into that convention play. Faro is an interesting alternative to poker, though the rules aren't super clear about how to play it. It's taken me another play since then to feel like I've actually got it down now. I'm not sure how needed the addition of the train was, because it's only used for bandit players, who already have plenty to do in the game, but it's a fun pursuit for them. I really like the new frontier action spaces and the event deck that puts additional tokens to interact with in play, though. Those are really cool additions to the game and resulted in a super fun time and a grand adventure. I just love getting lost in this world. I'd like to try the game again with my wife and the Man in Black rules and see if she likes the game better at 2 players. But even if that doesn't happen, I hope to avoid this game getting dusty again in the near future. It's the sort of game that is worth scheduling time for because there's so much content to explore, and it's always exciting to see how the game plays out, win or lose. Let's see what a contributor brought out of the dust. Ron A., username SBGrad, brought Ace of Aces handy Rotary series out of the dust. Ace of Aces is a classic 1v1 World War I aviator dogfight-themed picture book game that pits one aviator and plane against another. In this style of picture book game, each player receives a manual divided into pages that shows the view of their opponent as seen from their cockpit. Each turn, players select a maneuver, turn to the relevant pages that depict those maneuvers, and compare the results of what their opponent is doing to see if they deal any damage or not. There are a lot of variations in this style of game from vintage 80s gaming days, including the Lost World fantasy setting, a dinosaur theme, Star Wars, and Battletech. Ron writes, "Okay, so I can't use the Out of the Dust tool to determine how dusty this game is because, frankly, BGG didn't exist the last time I played this game, and I don't go back and add games from pre-BGG that I know I've played. My copy dates back to 1980 or 81, not exactly sure, but it is the original printing and it has survived almost 4 decades of college, marriage, a kid, and 5 to 6 moves. Back in the day I got it because it was the simplest of filler games. I would bring it to cons and I could pull it out of my pack and explain how to play and finish a game in 15 minutes. For whatever reasons, it's been sitting in closets the past 25 years or so. These days we have more multiplayer meetups and filler games tend to be multiplayer as well. Things like The Grizzled. One of the people at the meetup is fairly new to gaming and he will play anything, especially the old stuff. A couple of weeks ago I got a geek mail and he starts listing games from my collection that he wants to play. City Fight, Modern Combat in the urban environment, and Ace of Aces among them. Naturally, I bring Ace of Aces along next time we play. 4 hours of wargaming with urban operations later, it's only 10 p.m. or so, and we still have an hour before the FLGS closes. Out comes Ace of Aces, and like riding a bicycle, you don't forget how to play. 3-minute explanation, and we are playing. First game took 15 or so minutes. Thing is, this thing is like popcorn or M&Ms. You can't stop at just one. The only reason why we stopped was because the store closed. We played another 4 games the week after that. I guess I'll just leave it in my go bag from now on. Thanks for the contribution, Ron. This style of game really appeals to me because it's so unusual and unlike anything in modern gaming. It's good obscure fun. I own some of the Lost World and Star Wars books, and I'm always on the lookout on adding more of this style of game to my collection. Reaction segment time. My original plan for the segment this week was to compare the differences between the BGG Con Geek Buzz list and the Essen Geek Buzz list, but it turned out that there wasn't much difference at all, so instead I'll tell about my experience at my first ever BGG Con. I'll take a couple of episodes to do this. I've been wanting to experience some of the other major national conventions for some time. Unfortunately, many of those, like Dice Tower Con and PAX, are on the coast, which is not convenient for me at all, but BGG Con is in Dallas, which is only about 10 hours away from Omaha. I hate flying and love driving, so this seemed like the next most logical con to make it to. I decided to take a couple of days to drive leisurely down, but almost took too long because I wound up getting one of the last few spots of the convention hotel parking lot. It's the first year the convention moved to a new hotel downtown, and they severely underestimated the parking demand. But they were able to rescue later attendees by leasing some other lots a little further away. Judging from the feedback thread after the convention, the parking situation wound up being just one of the few negative issues with the convention. I was quite impressed with the space itself. The main gaming hall was huge, very spacious, and the acoustics surprisingly effective. Despite hundreds of people in the main gaming hall at any given time, I was able to communicate with others at my table without any difficulty at all. The 8,000 game BGG library was as legendary as I'd been told, and I was able to take advantage of it when I needed to without issue. But I also took the library as a challenge, deciding only to bring games of my own to play that weren't in the expansive library, and I was able to bring several obscure selections. While BGG Con is primarily an open gaming kind of con, which is not my preference, there was a meetup geek list created for people to schedule select games on. Most of these were of the epic variety, where finding committed players at a moment's notice might otherwise prove challenging, but I figured the obscure games I wanted to play would also fit into this category as well, so I took the liberty of scheduling several obscure Bryce games to promote the podcast. I scheduled sessions of Pez, Dinosaurs of the Lost World, and Emira. I was a little leery if people who signed up for these sessions ahead of time would actually remember them and not get distracted by other activities going on at the con in the meantime, but this wound up being a concern I didn't need to worry about. All of my scheduled sessions went off without a hitch, and almost all the players who signed up for them showed up. The few that didn't were easily filled by lonely players circulating the hall looking for something to play, the type of player I was very happy to snap up. Pez was the perfect way to end the first day of the convention. All the players had a raucous good time with it, and I'm inspired to make that a staple of any convention I attend from here on out. Dinosaurs of the Lost World, which I kicked off Thursday with, felt like the epic adventure that it is. The game was very tight amongst most of the players for most of it, and we had some exciting leader changes throughout. The game came down to the last turn where a player had a chance to win but couldn't manipulate the frames of his escape adventure to get off the Lost World Plateau, which left the door open for B to steal away the victory instead. The session of Emira, which I played right after Dinosaurs of the Lost World, and a game I'll talk more about in the Obscure Bryce game segment this week, was a full 5-player game that almost expended the entire Princess deck. Several players were tied and just a princess away from winning for the last half-dozen turns before one of them finally broke the tie with some clever card manipulation to earn a well-deserved victory. One of the other things I scheduled time around at the convention was pitching some of my game designs to publishers. I wanted to make sure to devote some convention time to that activity and wound up getting some positive leads from the endeavor. Hopefully something will come from one of those pitch sessions and I'll be able to make an exciting announcement in a future episode. This week on the What I've Been Playing segment, I'm going to tell you about Bus, a classic title from the Splotter library and Splotter designers Jeroen Douwman and Joris Wersinga that is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year with a new edition from publisher Capstone Games. Bus was one of the first Splotter titles and has been out of print for almost the entirety of its existence, but it shouldn't have been because this is an amazing game. Here's how it works. Bus is a worker placement game in which players are limited to 20 total workers to use for the entire game. Once a worker is used for any action, it is permanently removed from the game. A player is obligated to use at least 2 workers each round, but can use as many as they like. Once all but one players have used all of their workers, the game ends, and the player who has managed to scratch out the most points wins. The workers are used to place routes, bring bus riders and destination tokens into play, deliver the riders to their destination, manipulate where that destination is, and increase the effectiveness of their actions. The latter action also places a bus meeple in the player's parking lot. The quantity of bus meeples a player has in play influences how many riders a player gets to potentially deliver with each worker designated for the task, and influences how many routes, riders, and destinations are placed when those actions are taken by any player. The game revolves around this very clever and deliciously agonizing turn order system in which the first player to place a worker at most actions takes the full strength of the action, equal to the largest quantity of buses of any color in play, but also acts last for that action. So, if I place a worker at the Map New Routes action first, I might get to lay more routes than anyone else, but the other players who took that action this round get to lay fewer routes first. It's a brilliant mechanic that makes every single worker placement incredibly crucial. It's entirely likely that a player will wind up placing workers that look effective at the time, but by the time that action and worker resolves, the action may wind up being completely ineffective, or even worthless. Trying to manipulate the board state so that this happens as infrequently as possible is a key strategy to victory. Points are earned whenever a player delivers a rider to the desired location for the round, which can also be manipulated with one of the actions. This is a lot harder than it seems, and happens a lot less frequently than one might imagine. With only 20 total workers, most of those actions needed to build up infrastructure first or along the way, it takes several actions to yield even a single point, resulting in a very low-scoring game. I managed a remarkable 8 points once, but in every single other game I've played or been informed about, the winning score has been 4. The game is incredibly tight, and taking actions to screw the other players is both pivotal and essential, which can make the game very mean at times, but I love it. Because of the effort required in generating even just a handful of total points, these points feel very good and very well earned. I get a feeling of having actually earned those points in Bus more than most other games. This creates a very satisfying experience. In fact, after a handful of plays, I'm ready to declare Bus my favorite splatter game. It's a remarkable design that managed to feel innovative 20 years after its initial release, which is a feat worthy of exceptional praise. It also feels completely different than other splatter games, which are typically characterized by their elaborate processes to accomplish goals. But Bus is surprisingly straightforward for a splatter game. You can teach it in just a few minutes, and the 2-hour estimate printed at BGG is the rare overestimate for a game. Player count may influence things slightly, but most of my games have been wrapping up in about an hour. I pre-ordered this new edition of Bus based solely on my previous positive experiences with splatter games, but Bus has surpassed my expectations and truly blown me away. This is going to be a Game of the Year contender for me. Obscure Bryce Game segment time. This week on the segment, I'm going to tell you about Emira, a 2006 release from Phalanx Games and designers Paul Van Hove and Lisbeth Van Zier. Emira is the only publication for either one of them. I remember when I first acquired this game many years ago. At the time, there were no good local Black Friday sales at any of the board game stores. One store was selling a very select inventory for 30% off, which wasn't a very exciting deal at all. But I was desperate for any kind of a deal. And so I bought a couple of games based purely on their cover. The Emira cover, featuring a harem of women, was certainly eye-catching, and it turned out that Emira had as unique a theme as its cover, as players are sheiks competing for the opportunity to add various princesses to their harem, based on the development of desirable attributes like status, personal improvement, money, and palace size, wink wink. The first player to increase his harem to a certain size, or composed of a certain skill set, like cooking and looking good, wins! Obviously, despite one of the designers being a woman, it's not the most politically correct of games, but I am a lover of games with unique themes, and no one can argue that Emira is in a class of its own in that regard. But the attractiveness of the game doesn't end there. It's actually a masterful game in regard to mechanics. While the theme might lead one to believe this was a casual party game, in reality it's a hardcore economic Euro auction game. Here's how it works. At the beginning of the round, a new princess is revealed from the top of the princess deck. Each princess has a primary interest and a secondary interest that determines which harem she will join. A princess might, for example, prize status primarily and palace size secondarily. Then the players bid for the opportunity to purchase something